Welcome again for this episode. We have a function realized during the last episode to count the number of occurrences of a pattern in a given line. For the sake of explaining the concepts of FFI, foreign function interface, I started from the counter, but in reality, when we practice TDD rigorously and religiously, we should start with an acceptance test first. So it's time for us to express a requirement as a test first. And I take this as an opportunity rather to introduce the organization of such integration tests. That's what the terminology of Rust is when we are developing a library. So let us start with uh, writing or expressing our requirement as a test first. So I told yesterday that this is a function. We are keeping it for the sake of a placeholder to check if the counter is visible or the function that what the counter is offering is visible to this library. So literally we don't want this function now. So rather we will first start from the integration test for this library. And how to create this integration test is, now you have a pattern and the counter, and the test for this is a unit test. The integration test will live in the same directory hierarchy of SRC. In other words, if pattern counter is our directory, that's where the SRC is. mkdir will use a tests here. So this will be the place where we can have our tests. So write our first test. What is the first test is going to be? Let's give a name for this feature. You can follow your own pattern, that pattern counter feature. Anything that ends with a feature, you can think of this as an acceptance test. So here we are going to have, as usual, the same test directive, and fn should and we are going to use this pattern counter for this. So you can use this pattern counter, which is the assembly, or which is rather it. Now you are treating this pattern counter as a external crate, and the library is nothing but a crate. We'll see that shortly. So in the pattern counter, we are going to call this get frequency, and we are going to pass the file name and dot slash. Within the tests directory, we'll have the class dot csv. We'll copy that shortly, and we are going to look for this pattern wind here, and this will give us some result. So, and if asset echo, the result should be okay. We are just writing all these things like a story, and there will be several errors that we will fix that one after other. So this will give us an idea that there is going to be a method called as get frequency in the pattern counter library, and meaning in the lib.rs we are going to have a pattern, get frequency method. Um, so we can make this as get frequency of pattern in a file. Python data science guys are using this word frequency, so we will also use this frequency here. Get frequency of pattern in a file, and asset equals this should be true, and let us copy the within the test directory. I'm going to have this the class data. So now we got a class.csv, and what we are doing here is, if I provide this wind, okay, I took a different CSV, it seems. Yes, this has the wind, where the type is now a text rather than a numeric value. So wind is what we are having here, and we are expecting 163 frequencies or count of wind in this file. So glass.txt is the one we are going to use here, and wind, and when I am unwrapping the result, then it should be how much it is, 163. Yes, so that is what I am expecting. So this is our acceptance test or the integration test for this context. Let us check what happens when I run this. Cargo, I'll show what happens now. Let us give some more space for this. Cargo tests. Now it's returning an error that the get frequency method expected value found a create pattern counter. Use the path separator to refer to an item pattern counter dot get frequency, but definitely that will be a very nice idea. So because a get frequency is a method that is available in the pattern counter, and the pattern counter is not an object, rather it is a crate. So I'm using this colon get frequency here. That's a very good suggestion. So let us see what are the other errors we have. So now the test is great. The compiler is giving us the right guidance again and again. Cannot find the function get frequency in crate pattern counter. Crate, and the pattern counter is considered as a crate by the compiler. So that's the inference we got from here. So the next is get frequency. We know that the get frequency method is not available there. And the most important piece is when we create a directory like tests with a .rs file, the cargo test is able to identify that as it is a acceptance test. Okay, so now let us get into the get frequency method. So this gives us some idea. The pattern counter should have a get frequency method that should accept two string or two string slices and should return a result. And let us go here and write this pub fn get frequency. This is going to accept two strings. The first is the file path, and the second is the pattern. Okay, and this is supposed to return a result of u-particle. Okay, and it is asking for what is this result. We are going to read this file line by line, and then whenever we are dealing with file, definitely there will be an IO issue is likely to happen. So in other languages we call this an IO exception. In Rust we call this an IO error. So that's the reason I put this as a result, because it may be either an erroneous situation or it can be a normal situation. If it is a normal situation, we have the number of occurrences computed using the count of method. Otherwise we are going to return or send the error that what we have received during the time of reading the file. So what we are going to do now is we will try to read the open the file first. Let file equals there should be a file. Just like every language, there should be a mechanism to open a file and file path. And I know that where the file is, so use std IO file fs.file. Sorry. So now we got the file, and when we have received the file, it is giving me the file if it is everything is fine. Otherwise, it is retaining error. So as I explained in one of the episodes earlier, either you can check for if file dot is err, and then you can take some action. Especially we can convert this into we can send a string also by returning err of unable to read the file. So this is one way of doing this thing, and then we can return a OK of some value. And unable to read the file is a string slice, and it is expecting a string, so we have to provide it as to string to make the compiler to get satisfied with our acts. But we don't want to do such a very heroic thing that getting this file, checking that is err, and return again whatever is available in the form of a string. So rather, in a simple thing, that what you can do is this equivalent of throwing this exception without doing anything to the outside world. So you put a question mark simply here. So what it will do is that it will try to unwrap the value that what this open method is giving you, and in case if it is a error, then automatically the second part of this thing will come into play. So now what's the thing? This enum take two arguments, but only one is supplied. And what is this result then? So this is std.io.result, but this result seems a different one. It's an enum result, and many times I used to get this confusion. What is this result and what is a enum result? This is an IO result. So we will import and now this error is satisfied. Now we just open this file, and like every other languages, Rust is giving you an ability to read the file line by line. In Java we used to have a buffered reader. The same thing is available in Rust also. Now what you can do is that it will be available in this IO crate. So hereafter we'll use the word IO crate, and that will have a buff reader. So you can use a buff reader. You can create a buff reader like this, and then you can start read lines by line. So let reader equals buff reader colon new, and we can pass this file as a parameter to this, and we are sending the file here. And in addition to that, this buff reader will have some mechanics to give me the number of lines. Yes, it's having lines, and this lines seems like a struct for this. And what we can do with this line is, the way that we can effectively use this line is, once if we got this line, and then we can use this to flatten that. And once if we flatten this, now it's complaining about items from traits can only be used if the trait is in scope. So it means that we are missing some trait. Yeah, we need a buff read also. That is a trait that what we require to satisfy this error. So now what it is? So it is more of a iterator, flatten. And as we saw yesterday, that we can make use of a for loop to go through the line one after the other. So we can have this as a iter. And once we have this iterator, now we can for line in iter. We can travel this using a for loop. And this line is a string now, which is nothing but the first line that we can use for the counter, but that is an ampersand str. Anyway, we'll do the conversion on the fly. So we have this counter now that has a count off. So to the count off method, we'll pass this pattern that is available already as an ampersand str, and then we will send this line as str. Because this is a string, we cannot pass it directly. You can see this error now. Line, this is a string and expected str, and we are passing a string, so we will use as str to convert this line into samples in str counterpart, and this will give us the count, which is a u32, and let us see if we have a node count where we are going to accumulate the count of each and every line, and we can return instead of 0, we can put this count here. That's it. But shortly we'll make this code better, but this is the essence of this. Now we'll check whether our attempt is yielding any positive results, and to make this test to pass. Cargo test. Cool. We got the right result the first time itself. And now you can see that there are two tests it is running. Should count pattern. So that is where from it is coming. It is in the test where we have should count pattern. So it is a test, it is a unit test. And if you come here, should get frequency of pattern in a file. So this is what is a test that what we have just written here. Where is it? If I close this, it is leaving the same place. That is coming from this pattern counter feature.rs. So when you are running this thing, normally there are two tests that is running. First it will run all the unit tests, followed by all your acceptance test. And if you are not believing that this is giving you the right result, we will just cheat this test with some 93 or 99 ratio, and let us check whether really our counter is doing its job. Yeah, So the result dot unwrap of this get frequency is truly giving you 163, and the right is that what we have plotted now. So it's working fine. So we have a working code now, and I'm showing again. So there are, when you run the cargo test, first it runs the unit test, and then it runs all your tests that what you have declared in this tests directory at par with SRC. So if you are conversant with the Maven of Java, then you can consider this SRC directory, and all these tests are the feature test. That's the reason I'm using this word feature. Feature test is the one you can consider this as the acceptance test, and unit test won't have any features as a features in the sense pattern counter underscore feature. So you can differentiate a acceptance test from the unit test by adding underscore feature. This is something that what we learned from the Ruby on Rails, where we used to have this spec, the specification. So this feature is more of a specification for this library. So anyone who is using your library will come and see what you have offered here in this test directory, and that will act like a living documentation. Okay, so we will go back to the lib again, and what we can do is that there is a way that we can compress all this code into a functional programming style of or a high order function. So what in essence we are doing, we are taking this buff reader colon new this file, and then that is giving you that lines, because it is basically it is a reader, and I had taken these lines, sorry, lines, and then flatten. Then we are using a for loop to travel through this thing, and for this what we can do is that we can use a map, and then we can write a closure there, so that will give me this line, and then I'm going to count plus, or simply what we can do is that we can pass this count of line as str comma pattern dot sum. Count of line dot as str. Let it be a, let's define what is the value, type of this. And this file, okay, so we will use an ampersand here at both the places, okay. Because once if you are not using the reference, it's a indication that this file is moved into this buffer reader. I'm going to delete this line, but I'm having this line just to show you really what is happening. Now we can return the frequency rather than the count. So this 1 2 3 4 5 meaningful lines. Now we have shown our arrogance of higher order function, and this is how this is working. So we took the reader and we read the line, and then we have flattened that, and then we used a map to read each of this line, and we pass this line to this count of method that what we are having in the counter, and then the pass this pattern, and finally we started summing all these things, and we have put that into the frequency. So we can remove now this lines, and this is another way to do it, and let us check whether it is still the functionality is intact. Yes, so it is one line of code to offer this to the individual counters. So in case if you on a later time, when we have a very huge file offered to us, then we can split that into multiple lines, chunks, and then we can give it to different counters, and we will do that as a exercise sometime in the future. So that's all now, that it is a way to organize a test for this great called as pattern counter feature. And the pattern counter feature is telling you if I give you a file that is living in the same place along with the test directory. So the dot slash test means the pattern counter is, this is a parent directory for this test. So we are giving a relative path from the pattern counter. So dot slash test slash class.txt, and then we pass this wind, and it is giving us a right result. And this is a way you can organize your acceptance test.